Thanks for coming, everybody. We thought before we start any discussion, especially given that this is a small enough group, we'd ask everybody to introduce themselves. If you have a group you're working with that you want to mention, please feel free to do so when you do introduce yourself. And then we'll sort of do an introductory bit and open things up for the discussion. So I guess we got to start. Why don't we start over here? Just tell us who you are, and as I say, if you're with a group that you'd like to mention, please feel free.
I'm Deborah Milan, and it's my first time here. I'm not with the group. I just would like to see what's happening. The resistance.
Okay, that's good.
Natalie Manzino, same.
Hi, I'm Jerry Goralnik. I work with the War Resisters League New York chapter and the Metropolitan Anarchists Coordinating Council.
Okay, over here.
I'm Emily. I'm the program coordinator with
You
Brooklyn.
just stand up on my service.
Emily's our new program coordinator.
Yeah, that's me. So.
She'll be the voice nagging you. As these months go by. We're very happy to have her, in this stuff. So welcome, Emily.
Somebody wants to hand these out.
Hi, I'm Skylar Sheandra. I'm friends with Emily. She told me to come out to this event, so I wanted to come and support her and see what you guys are doing.
Okay, well, thanks. Okay, you folks.
I'm Mitchell Cohen from the Brooklyn Greens, Green Party.
I'm Alex Steinberg from the Permanent Revolution website, and I'm also a member of the Pacifica National Board and the WBI local station board. And I teach at the Brooklyn Commons occasionally.
My name is Robin Esser, and I'm not with any group.
Hi, I'm Alana McLeod-Luver. I am part of Brooklyn Anti-Gentrification Network, but but not representing them.
Ellen Myers, longtime member of Brooklyn for Peace.
I'm Mukti Banerjee. I'm involved with Brooklyn for Peace with the board and fundraising committee.
Actually, people stand up. That at least would help when you're introducing yourself.
Ken Diamondstone, a member of the Peace and Social Action Committee of the Quakers, and board member of Brooklyn for Peace.
Ralph Buffetto, member of Brooklyn for Peace, Jewish Voice for Peace, and Bay Ridge Peace Action.
I'm Arnold Gore. I'm a member of Brooklyn for Peace and Jewish Voices for Peace. Only I haven't been active enough, and I'd like to be more so.
Susan Epstein, same member, not so active member of Brooklyn for Peace and Jewish Voice for Peace, and would like to become more active.
I'm Miran Hossein. I'm with Jewish Voice for Peace, Brooklyn for Peace, and One for the Art.
I'm Ed Goldman, and I'm with Fort Greenpeace, which is connected to the hip, by the hip, at the hip. to Fort Green, to Brooklyn for Peace. I also gave this thing out here from somebody else. Just want you to know.
Hi, I'm Ann Sheridan with Met Council on Housing.
Okay, Matt, tell us who you are.
Just told me. Matthew Weinstein, Brooklyn for Peace.
Sam?
Sam Koprak, Brooklyn for Peace.
And Carolyn and Tara?
Okay, I'm Carolyn Hughes. I'm with Brooklyn for Peace and Mixteco, which is an organization in Sunset Park that supports recent immigrants from Mexico and Central America.
What's it called?
Mixteco. Mixteco. M-I-X-T-E-C-A.
And I'm Tara Curry with Brooklyn for Peace.
Okay, I think we've got everybody.
No.
Who's that?
You.
No, he already introduced.
We got it.
We have him.
Oh, we
We
got it.
know
Sorry,
him. As if we feel like we've known him
Attention.
forever, actually.
Okay, and Rusty?
Oh, hi. So I'm Rusty Eisenberg. I am co-founder of Brooklyn for Peace, now vice chair of Brooklyn for Peace. And I guess the other thing that's relevant just for today is that I'm sort of on quasi-leave for the moment, but for most of the last 10 years, I've focused on legislative activity for Brooklyn for Peace, and I've also been national coordinator for legislation for United for Peace and Justice. So I've been involved in a lot of the national networks that have tried to do work around peace and military issues.
Okay, and we missed one of our other co-vice chairs, Veronica.
Yes, I'm Veronica Nunn, and I'm one of the vice chairs on Brooklyn for Peace.
Okay, and I'm Bruce Oldswell, and I'm the other vice chair, vice co-chair of Brooklyn for Peace. And before we start, I would like to mention our next event, which is probably our most important event of the year, and that's our Pathmakers to Peace dinner. It's a great event. It's also our major fundraiser for the year, and we're giving our awards to three groups and individuals. One is the Poor People's Campaign, and Liz Theo Harris is going to come, and she'll be one of our speakers, and we're hoping, we're still not sure, it's possible the Reverend Barber may be able to come as well. It just depends on, you may be busy getting arrested in some other city or something. And we're also giving an award, some people mentioned the group, to Rebecca Vilcomerson of Jewish Voices for Peace, and to Make the Road. So those are three, and I hope, I know there are a number of people here who are already coming, so I hope people can keep that date, December 6th, clear. It's at the Plymouth Church. And
how much are tickets?
Well, tickets are $150.
First time is $135.
$135, yeah, if you've never been before.
And great food.
Yes, great food. Yes, and so we hope people can come. You can sign up. You can go to our website, brooklynpeace.org, and sign up there. Or I imagine.
Well, if anyone.
I imagine we'll take your money tonight.
Yeah, and if you know you want to come over and let us know tonight if you think.
Yeah, you don't have to give us the $150 tonight.
Well, you take charge cards, right?
We do.
We accept checks.
And then I'll return it.
The idea of tonight's forum basically is we deliberately scheduled it for about a week after the election. We thought we know there are a lot of people who did throw a great deal of energy into the election and don't want to wait till the 2020 election to do something more. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity to discuss sort of what should we do now. We certainly can't, even though there were some good results, waiting for the Democrats to save us is going to be a futile exercise. So what do we do? There seems to be a crisis virtually every 5 minutes. There seems to be a new issue virtually every 5 minutes. And that's one of our major problems. How do we pick our priorities? What ought we to do? We could literally go to several demonstrations a day. How do we want to expend our energies? How should we prioritize? We're a peace group, so obviously peace issues are forefront, but other issues are strongly connected as well. And that's the second theme I hope we'll discuss tonight, and that is one way to set priorities is to see how issues are connected and to work on the connections between those issues and make connections between groups. So people may also want to talk about the groups they're working with, how those groups can work together, how we can all work together to deal with these particular issues. There are now some checks within Congress as a result of the election. How can we utilize those checks to achieve the kinds of goals that we're working on? So that's what I hope we'll discuss. People may have other issues they'd like to bring up. We also have a proposal for anybody who'd like to see it. Ann Ambia from our executive board was unable to be here, and she had a proposal for a campaign dealing with hate crimes, and I think we probably passed those out, but if you didn't get one, they're at the table available. So I'll now turn things.
Not anymore.
Well, okay, they're not.
They're available back there.
Okay. Veronica has the next one. So,
You know, maybe it would be also helpful just for people from the committees that are actually working, you know, to just say a little bit about, because it's not, we're not just starting from ground zero. Right, there's been work underway, and it might just be, in terms of the discussion, it might be really helpful, you know, to say a little bit about that. So I'm looking at Matt, or from the PJ committee, and others who are here on other committees that want to say something about it, just so we have a sense of where we are. Yeah.
Well, we had, I'm sure the discussion will proceed on what to focus on, as Bruce points out, because there are too many issues. But we had a very, very successful meeting right here with over 100 people on the question of Yemen, which was in the news today, because the Republican Congress, which is a lame duck Congress, passed a bill today that wipes out any possibility of debate on the war in Yemen. I forget what number that was, but it did pass. I was watching it live on C-SPAN. And the Republicans were more interested in unfettering and unregulating laws that don't allow the mass slaughter of gray wolves. And this is what they were all in a tither about. And quite a few Democratic representatives stood up there and said, but we are not discussing health care. We're not discussing this horrendous war in Yemen that has killed tens of thousands of people and where an entire population is teetering on the edge of mass starvation on top of a cholera epidemic. You know, the UN calls the war or the conditions in Yemen the world's single greatest humanitarian crisis. So we raised close to $3,000, I believe, that night, and in a run-up to that event. We made links with some of the Yemeni community here in Brooklyn, and there are a number of groups that are still working very hard on this in the light of that horrific assassination, thug-like, mafia-like assassination by Kushner's buddy, the prince. What are his initials?
MBS.
MBS, which they have, that's Mohammed bin Salman, but they've renamed him as Mr. Bonesaw because of the way they hacked this guy to death. So and that's what MBS should really stand for. And this is, you know, this is Trump's best friend and his son-in-law's best friend. And despite threats to enact some sort of sanctions, actually nothing has been done in the light of that assassination, not to mention the tens of thousands that have died and the many more millions that are suffering in Yemen. So I think that, to my mind, should be a priority. You can bet your bottom dollar that Trump, with his failing, you know, falling levels of popularity, which are in the toilet as far as I'm concerned, and that election proves it, we might very well resort to a time-tested technique of unleashing a war, particularly against Iran, which the Yemen events are a subset of, a proxy war against Iran. Recent news articles talk about the inability to get medicines in Iran now due to harsh U.S. sanctions that have been reenacted, reassessed. And so you can expect that be there no war now, although there are a myriad of wars that are, you know, done under the cloak of subterfuge and without making it into the press, that the question of Iran and Yemen will come to the forefront, and I think Brooklyn for Peace should engage some of these other groups and build opposition to that war in a very forthright way.
Oh, somebody wants to say something. Yes.
I think an important point of what you just said is money. Mohammed bin Salman would not be Trump's friend if Saudi Arabia was not buying for $40 or $50 billion worth of arms from the US. So, I mean, money is a very important factor in this situation.
Is there anybody else is anybody here from the Israel-Palestine Committee who wants to say something? All right, so I think we should just open it. Ken?
No, I'm not from the Israel-Palestine. We are faced with a very interesting new situation in New York State. And that is the Democrats will control both houses of the legislature for the first time in truly, I don't know where, 30?
Probably since the Rockefeller days.
The 50s or something like
Yeah,
that.
in the 60s.
And so with that, I'd like to at least have us consider focusing on some very important local issues, state issues, that we can have a truly significant bearing on, such as election reform and campaign finance reform, funding for, and not just lip service, for a fossil-free future, funding for education, not just for charter schools, as a matter of fact, not for charter schools. Legislation for gender equality, legislation for equal pay for women, getting rid of the bail system. Those are issues that we could now deal with, and of course, stronger rent legislation. So I really think, despite the fact that I'm an owner, so I think we have an opportunity to do more work at the local level, at the state level, on issues that relate to peace and social justice. Certainly those, I mean, a fossil-free future is strongly connected to our relationship with the international community and wars and the search for oil and for fossil fuels and land grabs. And so I leave it at that. I think we should focus a good deal of our efforts, if more than in the past, on state and local issues.
I was going to do an initial thing. I just wanted to sort of just underline some of the things that are happening at present that are, you know, sometimes you're in meetings, and especially if you're looking at the same faces that you've been looking at for years, oh, it's the same old thing, the same old thing. But obviously we're not in the same old thing. And, you know, there are a number of things that are happening now that are different. And I think actually part of the reason that we decided to have this meeting and just have it be an open discussion is to just give us a chance to process together, you know, some of the things that are happening now that are actually different and that, you know, pose a different challenge. I mean, obviously one piece of it, which I'm sure everybody here has 3 hours of opinion about, is we have a very different kind of president. And we have a president that you know, again, we may all see it in somewhat different ways, but we have a president that is posing any number of dangers that are actually different from the dangers of our usual bad presidents. So, I mean, that's right. I mean, but and so I think just it's a challenge to us to think about that. I think one simple result that we've actually seen is a lot of people, including people in this room, have done more electoral work this time around than they have usually, and you know, reflecting partly the oddity of this presidency. So this kind of that on the one hand. I think the second thing, which is sort of tied to what Bruce said, is that there's so many emergencies. Like every time you look up, there's another emergency. You know, since I've been with Brooklyn for Peace forever, I have the long view. One of the things about our organization is that it grows exponentially when there's a war about to happen. When there doesn't seem to be any obvious war, you know, we don't grow as much. I mean, that you know, people are making choices. And I think partly what's going on now is that, you know, every time you look, there's something else that seems to claim your attention. And so there's a challenge for us as a peace group, not to lose our identity, but to have to figure out, as we're organizing, how to recognize the fact that there are these, you know, multiple crises that are taking place. I mean, just they're like losing, you know, 500 children this summer because they forgot to like take notes. I mean, this is right. So I think that's actually one of the, you know, particular challenges we have when so many things are going, you know, overtly wrong, like at any moment. Like, where do we fit as a peace group? So I think there's that. I think another thing that's a little bit different right now is that because of Trump and the way he is handling international relations and the whole Russia question, one of the things that's happened is that the worst hawks have now gotten empowered. You know, if you turn on MSNBC, you know, you can see Brennan and Clapper and Max Boot, all these people that, you know, any liberal really, you know, was horrified by because of their propensity, and Bolton, of course, is, well, but they're not putting Bolton on.
No, he's
And
not
when-
on MSNBC.
No, see, that's what I'm saying, is that what's happened now is, I mean, somebody like Brennan, who, you know, how many people is he responsible for assassinating with predators? You know, these people are now getting on the airwaves in the liberal world. And it's become very difficult to argue for negotiations when people then feel, well, here's Trump, and what is he doing, and we don't trust him anyway. So a lot of, you know, in a weird way, there's been a kind of a liberal default for war and peace issues, which is also forms part of our problem. And, you know, I was talking with Bruce before, I mean, there hasn't been very much discussion about the military budget right now. So those issues have somewhat receded. And that's a reality that we face. So that also is a challenge for our organizing. And I'm going to stop now, but I just think that, you know, and probably everybody here has your own definition of like what, you know, what is most a problem for us as a group. But we thought it was good to have a space where we could talk it through a little bit and see where people are, you know, are coming from. So I'm mostly just mentioning problems, not solutions. But I want to open up the floor.
Yeah.
So I would love to see, addition to everything that people are talking about the legislation, I'd like to see more direct action-oriented attacks from the left that we could make in defense of people who are under attack. And I was thinking of, you know, just talking this as brainstorming. I don't have it worked out, but it seems to me that we've let all the business supporters and corporations who've supported Trump and others off the hook. So we have like Home Depot, which is everywhere. It's a great target, which is a main funder of the Republican right wing. Or we have the Koch brothers with a pavilion in Lincoln Center, and it says right across it, thanks to the Koch brothers. And it seems that I think we should figure out whether we could pick one or two good targets and initiate a campaign around that, whether it's boycotts, whether it's picket lines, whether it's other types of actions, whether it's organizing their workers who work for them to go on strike, whether there are all sorts of things that we could do. But so I would like to see if people like the idea that we could set up a small group to investigate what targets are the main funders of the Republican right wing and figure out a way of then going after it.
Okay, anybody else want to chip in?
Would you consider the banks to be part of that?
No, the banks are our friends. Didn't you have a friend at Chase Manhattan?
I'd like to Chase.
Second that.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I'd like to suggest something about this brochure that was passed out about hate crimes. I think you have to see the connection between hate crimes and hate speech. And I think it might be a really good campaign issue to make hate speech illegal and to make it punishable by prison sentences. And I think, I don't expect that to actually be passed anywhere, knowing the resistance in this country to such things, but I think a good model for the kind of laws that make hate crimes illegal, believe it or not, is the laws in Germany. The problem with the laws in Germany is they're just ignored. But they do have a good set of laws, at least on paper, against hate speech. And hate speech leads to hate crimes. There's an absolute direct connection. So I think even though I don't expect such legislation to ever be passed, it could really open up some important discussions about the whole issue. And it would be, instead of just a defensive operation, it could be something going on the offense. You're going on the offense against Fox News, against Breitbart News, and against Mr. Trump.
Although there are a number of colleges that have tried to to do that without great success. I think it's fair to say. It hasn't worked out so well on college campuses. Anybody else? Other folks? Some of the, yeah.
People should keep saying
To
their
begin
names.
with, we have laws on the books in this country regarding hate crimes, and if it's against an individual, it's a libel suit, slander, et cetera, et cetera. So we do have laws on the books, but I want to touch upon.
Fox News from pushing their poison.
If I may, sir.
Yeah,
I didn't speak when you were speaking.
It's not a debate today.
Okay, one at a time. The best way to communicate is one person speaks, the other person listens, and then vice versa. Then we both understand each other. Okay? So I would like to continue to say, we have been discussing for a long time on Brooklyn Peace about, rightfully so, some of the issues that are going on in foreign countries. But Ken brought up an idea. When you talked about when there are big issues, people come together and then they sort of dissipate. If you have a proposal and a well-written proposal brought before Brooklyn for Peace, and Brooklyn for Peace becomes the leader in solving some of these domestic problems, we bring people in, and then we can take on the larger people like the Home Depot or the Koch brothers, etc. Because it's like taking on Goliath, and you're not even David. Okay, so that's basically the issue. But we also have the issues in the Middle East. If there was no oil in the Middle East, half of America wouldn't even think about it. I agree with that woman there who talked about money. It's always about money. These wars are business wars, all right? If we look at it, Osama bin Laden attacked the United States because the United States used him to fight against Russia and the Communist Party. When they were successful, they promised them everything and then never came true with their promises. And so he orchestrated the 9/11 and other things. But I think that we have to we have to go into the Middle East and look at each area individually and see where the problem is. Saudi Arabia said if you don't solve the problem between Israel and Palestine, you can't solve any of the other things. So that is something that has to be looked at. And Yemen and Syria, et cetera, et cetera. But you can't do it with just a small group of people. You have to bring people in, and I think Ken came upon a good idea of issuing, if not actually fighting it, but issuing statements that Brooklyn for Peace is for this issue or against that issue domestically.
Okay, some people have been sitting sort of quietly here. Want to chime in? Okay.
All the money bills and appropriations for war have to originate in the House. And in the next Congress, there's going to be an awful lot of people who are going to be supportive of a very strong message of, zeroing out some of the funding for some of these war measures. It'll probably be stymied and compromised out with the Senate and things like that, but that doesn't put us off the hook, and it doesn't put representatives off the hook on taking positions on these kinds of issues. And in the next Congress, I think the ground is very fertile for some campaigns to target military appropriations. Which in this Congress will probably be compromised out. And the last time the Democrats had the entire Congress, both the House and the Senate, they still didn't zero out appropriations, but at least you were able to have some kind of input in negotiating them down.
Well, one of the problems that we face in dealing with Congress is the Brooklyn Congress people are pretty sympathetic with our position. And it's much harder to lobby other folks where we don't have a vote.
after this election, I think you have a lot more support out there. A lot, it's a little surprising, but he really brought out a lot of new voices.
That's true, and we also have Schumer has not been the most supportive of that. He is somebody we can pressure in that sense, because he signed off on the compromise appropriations bill that included $700 and some odd billion for the defense budget. So that is one person outside the House but in the Senate that we can pressure. Other folks, I know some people who haven't been. Please don't sit there quietly. We want to hear from everybody. Yes.
Right. I just printed last night. I really didn't get a chance to read it, but Indivisible came out with a new guide. Their Indivisible version 2, and it's on offense, a practical guide to the new Democratic House, and it has very, very specific suggestions on what to ask for and how to ask, and contacting National Indivisible for assistance. So it really hones in on what our impact, what different groups' impact can be now on getting Congress, who deals with ambiguity, to get them to hone in and focus in on very specific issues that we want them to move on.
Can I ask a quick question about that? Are they actually listing the issues, or is it more like a process?
I think it's more of a process, but I have a feeling that there are issues in here also. But I think this is more of a strategy and a how-to.
Can I come in here? Yeah.
You're as much in charge as I am.
I'm sorry, I recognize myself, okay. I do think that, the legislative situation has really switched right now. I mean, for the last 2 years, you couldn't do anything about anything. But the power in the House now is their ability to say no and to block things, right? They're not going to have, this is talk about all this positive legislation that they're going to have. There's going to be no positive legislation, but they can stop things. And I actually think that the Brooklyn delegation is important in that. And if I could just mention one example of what I'm talking about, just in terms of Brooklyn versus, in a larger context, because I don't know if everybody really knows this, but when there was work on the Iran treaty, and people were looking to get a vote of support in the House of Representatives, that effort was being coordinated nationally, and actually in this particular case it was also being coordinated to some extent with members with Nancy Pelosi and those people. But in that effort to build support for the Iran agreement, the Brooklyn delegation was very important, and actually that is, I did no work on it, so I can praise everybody else. It really was a lot of Brooklyn for Peace doing great work, because what happened, and I'm using this as an example of how the Brooklyn delegation can at certain times be very instrumental, because members of Congress understood that in Brooklyn, the pressure on our Congress people, given the Israel issue, to be against Iran was very great. And what we were able to do here was, by actually getting all of them to agree to the Iran treaty, when that happened nationally, because I was doing the national stuff, when the Brooklyn people came in solidly for that treaty, it actually had an effect around the country, because a lot of other people that were sitting on the sidelines, because they were worried about politics, if the Brooklyn people could do it, in Kansas we could do it. So I'm just using that as one example. Not everything isn't like that, but I do think that the fact that we have this delegation, and it's not, people like Hakeem Jeffries are not naturally good. So there's actually work to be done, but the Brooklyn delegation can actually play a pretty positive role over the next 2 years, if no other way, just blocking stuff. And then of course there is the question of Schumer. We have the most powerful Democrat, in the Congress, who's like our neighbor. and he's almost always awful. So, you know, I mean, and, you know, we've always like sort of annoyed him, but, you know, that's another option right now to think about.
Your turn?
I might suggest shifting the discussion a little bit into talking about strategy and tactics, because I think that we know what the issues are. I think everyone in this room knows what the issues are, and while we might not agree on details, in broad strokes, we're in agreement. That's why we're at this meeting. And so, following up on a committee meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago, what can we do that's really effective? What can we do to avoid being on the whipsaw that Trump has us in? That it's one issue and the other issue. Nuclear weapons and war in Korea was top of news, you know, a few months ago, and then it seemed to not be an issue. Now it's going to be an issue again. And what do we do to define what we're working on, to bring new people in, to change the minds of people who are wavering or maybe have misinformation on North Korea? For instance, there's a lot of misinformation on North Korea now, but you can pick the topic. There's misinformation out there, even among fairly well-read people. What can we do in organizing to rebuild, I hate to say a mass movement, because I don't think Brooklyn for Peace is going to, by itself, is going to build a mass movement, but more of a movement so that more than 20 people show up for a community meeting, for instance. What can we do differently to engage people, to engage different demographics than the one who's here tonight?
What's wrong with us?
There aren't enough of us. Yeah.
Someone in the back has a hand.
Yeah. Actually, those were the questions that came to mind while I was sitting here. The amount of people, these are people that I'm very familiar with, I know them, it's like the choir. And so I was wondering when Rusty was talking about the Democrats, the representatives that we have that are for us, how did we get them to back us? What were the actions that were taken? Did it mean that we just met with them in going to meetings, or was the material that we collected at tabling or petitions? What were the things that we did that got them to want to support us in the legislation? What was those things that we did? I believe that it was the people in the streets that helped that become possible because of all the information that we collected. I mean, that's kind of how I'm seeing it. So if that came about through the people of the street and not necessarily us in the room, us in the room were kind of the spearheads, but it was actually the photos we took of people holding signs, having people do penny polls. It was actually engaging our community. Because these things, when I think about people that I know in Brooklyn, and when I'm up in Woodstock, which is even more, Woodstock is peace and love, but everything around it is really intense and like wanting guns and, you know, yay Trump and all these other kind of things. I feel that it's our community. Why are we not connecting to the people in our community? Do we only talk to people that we know and what we live? I know not everybody lives only in a Jewish neighborhood, or only in a white neighborhood, or only in a black neighborhood. I know that's not true. So if that is the only way we communicate, is only with people we're comfortable with, then of course we're going to have a problem with organizing. Because, and even in our own age group, you know, do we talk to people who are younger than us? We don't. I know we don't. I mean, I don't even want to give young people time of day unless they can play music. And then it's like, okay, can you play the bass? I need a jazz bassist for this gig. But the point is that it really starts with how we step from this room and how we make these one-to-one connections with people, not with expounding our views and that this is this and that, but a real one-to-one connection on who are you and what's going on in your life and what's important to you. Because what's important to us may not be important to everyone that's around us. So we have to be able to connect the thing that's important to the basic people and somehow merge that with our greater focus of, say, on an international level. So I just wanted to reiterate what Tara was saying in what I think we need to take action and how to connect. I don't think we're connecting as well, personally.
Well, I mean, that's a crucial question. How do we make, what kinds of connections should we be making and how? Anybody have good ideas? I'll get to that, but there's some people who haven't said anything
No problem.
yet. No. Okay.
Well, I think that you're exactly right, and I also think that Ken touched on it also. You know, beyond the peace movement, which has really shrunk over the years, if you recollect on the eve of the Iraq War, I don't remember what the number was, but a massive demonstration in New York. Then there was a Republican convention here, and there was a massive demonstration. Things have retracted in terms of placing squarely the question of peace and war and militarism. And I dare say that, what's the name of the group again? Yeah, indivisible and all this electoral activity. I guarantee you that the question of war is not one of those issues that's on there. That's been a real problem of how to connect that, because let me tell you that if we are moving under Trump towards a world war or conflict with China and Russia and stuff like that, and that is indeed what is where seems to be the direction, and with this international anarchy that he's intent on providing by undermining all kinds of alliances and international cooperation, we're moving to the kind of a situation that existed before World War I and World War II. In this case, it'll be imperialist rivalry, not capitalist versus socialist, but different blocks of capitalist nations fighting for hegemony or oil resources or what have you, but on very, very dangerous turf. In Europe and in Asia, just the other day they talked about U.S. Playing a game of chicken with Chinese warboats off this reef, and that the possibility of a real conflict could be started there at any moment, and that's American generals talking. So these are very real. Question is, two things. One is this question of silos, which is a pervasive question that always exists and that we have not been successful in getting out of that. And that is that each group, be it environmental, 350.org for argument's sake, or indivisible, electoral, or any number, the women's movement, everybody in those particular movements are intent on focusing, and that's properly so, on their particular issue, but there is no attempt to broaden it out. I sat at a meeting of Brooklyn 350.org at BAM, well attended by people that I did not know, a lot of young people, mostly white, but there were some of our people who got up and spoke that I knew from Brooklyn for Peace over the years. Not one made the connection between the environment and militarism and war. That's a real weakness, I think. It's a weakness in the environmental movement that it can't see that connection. Who is the largest purveyor of CO2 emissions in the world? The U.S. military. What are these wars fought for? For oil and for carbon fuel domination. So it is intrinsically related, and we have to find those ways to connect those issues. It's been an impossible thing, and we're getting older. But that connection has to be made. I think that's the job of people in the peace movement. We need now more than ever a massive peace movement, but we have to find ways to connect with people who are in motion, and there are a lot of people in motion, way beyond the narrow confines of the peace movement or even the so-called left. Much, much broader sections of liberal people in the black communities, among women, witnessed the elections and the results. 100 new women or more are elected to the House of Representatives. That represents tremendous agitation and emotion on people that we are not even in touch with, which is what you said. We don't have to worry about the people around Woodstock. We have to first worry about people in the broader liberal movement that we're not even reaching. And that's what we should be examining. Look, today I watched Mayor de Blasio, the great progressive, self-styled progressive, on MSNBC this morning. Nick Confessori from the New York Times gave him hard questions about this Amazon scandal. And it's a scandal. It's reminiscent of the stadium scandal that Ratner foisted on the residents of Brooklyn. It's very reminiscent of that. This is paying $3 billion to a billionaire and rolling out the welcome mat under the promise of jobs somewhere down the road, maybe, which never materialized, and that's what they promised with the stadium. And then Ratner went and built prefabs and kicked the unions that supported him in the butt. And I guarantee you that de Blasio and Cuomo will long be gone when the residual effects of this deal of $3 billion, they claim they don't have money to fix the subways. They claim they don't have money to fix our schools. There's no affordable housing in this city. Wouldn't you think that would be priorities of the mayor, Democratic mayor and a Democratic governor, rather than welcoming a billionaire, vicious guy who has put thousands of businesses, small businesses, out of business, and he's inviting them in right here into our city, and they are the mortal enemy of all mom and pop stores and small businesses and entrepreneurs in the state. It's outrageous and obscene, and it should not be allowed. And I watched the rally this morning, but those are the people that we want to start to reach out. Tenants that are being forced out of their neighborhoods, and business people who are being forced to close because they can't compete with the behemoth like Amazon and the other masters of this brave new world that we've inherited now. So how to connect with people who are in motion around us that we never ever talk to, and that is the question of move the money, which, you know, we've talked about for years, but why are your schools so bad? Why is sanitation so bad? Why are our subways failing? The city claims it has no money, but it gives billions to them, and then the federal government cuts our cojones off by cutting back, and then, sure, the city is bankrupt. Give away the taxes and don't get money from the federal government, which wants to spend $700 billion a year on these, on defense corporations, essentially, just feeding them, taking our taxes and feeding them. That's an argument that I think can be directed to people in all movements and people who are in motion. And I think that we have to examine ways to reach those people. I don't think there's a magic bullet or a magic tactic that we can find that will reinvent us. I do think that we have to redouble our efforts to reach people where they're at, which is on these issues that Ken highlighted, which is what you're talking about, by talking to people not in our own little circles, but broadening out to people who are in motion, do want answers, and we can deliver those kind of answers. But I don't know what the techniques are, because we haven't been able to do it yet.
I think it was, did you want to say something? Put his hand up over there. Yeah. No?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was thinking that the war and the expenses of war are always connected to the needs at home, just as was said before, and there's also there's the movement for housing, education, against mass incarceration, and there must be a way of connecting all that, and healthcare. We haven't gone to that. That's a really hot issue. That was a hot issue with voters. That was one of the main issues. And to connect all the resources we're pouring into Saudi Arabia and war and killing people in Yemen, which we could be using here to address all these issues. And whether or not you can connect this, the mass incarceration issue is a big one in our communities. We're on the borderline of the gentrified Brooklyn. I think if you reach the people on those issues and made alliances with the Black Lives Matter movement, find ways of connecting peace, because it is connected. Why are we incarcerating people? Because we don't need their labor to make labor more. I mean, I don't have this great analysis, but I think we just. Those are the issues that are moving people who we might want to, have as allies in the peace movement, but to be able to make the connections is very important, and to reach out to them.
Yes.
I didn't go to the Veterans Parade, but I was planning on going there with some group who are looking to show that the original reason for the Veterans Day was to celebrate the ending of World War I, was it? Yes. And the armistice, I think it's called. Yes.
Yes.
So, you had water and all wars, thank you. Right, so that has been co-opted by the militarism, right? And our media and our commercialism of the holidays. So why don't we find another day and reclaim this ending wars or all wars, finding that during a time of the year that people can get up on it and involved in it, maybe a warmer day, because it can be cold on November. But there's a lot of holidays coming up. And I think we should do the same thing to every other holiday, because those who profit from the military buildup are counting the money that comes as a direct result of it.
Exactly.
And these are the same folk who are counting the money that comes out of us being such great consumers.
Yep.
And they teach us how to do so. So I think we should take every holiday that they have. Yeah, sorry if you're celebrating, I have not celebrated holidays for a long time. And turn them into avenues of information, connecting to people, even bring comedy to it. I mean, I think we should find ways to connect with people on these days as they come in, because it's a serious issue that we're dealing with. But we can be not a spoiled blanket on these holidays. We can make a nice little amusement out of it, of the holidays, just to connect. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, one of the difficulties for us in terms of issues is a lot of the issues that were major factors in the election are ones where people see a direct connection to their lives. I mean, I'm worried about health care if I can't pay my bills or if I can't afford it. I'm worried about housing because every time I take a look at my rent or my mortgage or whatever, I'm having difficulty paying it. I'm worried about transportation every time I take the damn subways. I'm worried about the environment every time I breathe the air. Every time it gets 107 degrees in my apartment, and I got to crank up the air conditioner full blast. On the other hand, war and peace is sort of out there. Well, you know, I mean, it could be important, but you know, a lot of us, for instance, became active in the peace movement during the Vietnam War. There was a draft at the time. Young people saw their interest in that same obvious way. So even if I wasn't going to get drafted, although actually I did, friends of mine might. We'd have to at least go in for a physical and get a little nervous about it. That direct connection isn't there. It isn't so obvious. Yes, we can say the defense budget is way too much and we should cut it. And people sort of agree with us when we do our penny poll. For example, saying, you have the figures, what do we get? People want to spend about 10% of the budget. Brooklyn people want to spend about 4% of the budget. And then we show them how much it is, and they're surprised. Yeah, getting to do something's another story about that. So I mean, I think that's one of the issues that we have to face. How do we get people to see those kinds of connections to their lives from the issues we're talking about? So, yeah.
So this is a valuable discussion that we've had a million times going back for forever, right? I wanted to come back to something Rusty was saying before, which is that we're in a fundamentally different period at this time. So there are two different questions at the same time about that. One, what is the nature of the different period that we're in? And what forces, you know, what is our analysis of that? That makes it different from arguing and discussing the same, not only strategies, but the same analyses of what we need to do. And then how do we go about and organizing within that in a different way? I mean, if it's just about doing this, what opportunities are opening up as well? So I think those are really, we can't just go back, I don't believe. I think we're facing fascism, and I don't think we can go back to the way that we functioned under neoliberal democracy, so-called, I use that in quotes. I think it's a fundamentally different thing that requires us to go after the resources that are, which is why I made that proposal before, that are funding the right, that are funding the fascists. and that we need to take the offensive against them, because if we don't, all of these we're going to lose. And then the people in Congress and in the legislature, who may be great, then could pick up from what we do, but not rely on them to lead the way, not spend all or most of our energy on them showing, fighting against only against the military budget, which is important. What is different? We fought against health care and it's under threat now, that's true. So that's a defensive battle to hold on, right? As some people said, we could vote no in Congress. I think Rusty was saying that. The main thing that we could do is stop what they're doing, maybe legislatively. That's not enough. We will lose if we take that position. We have to go on the offensive and figure out, in my view, how do we go and do that.
Yes. Yeah, no, she said something
Okay.
before, so. And you came a little late, so if you can introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Jo Southern. I feel like I've been, and I'm a newbie, so I have to apologize a little bit, but I've been on Brooklyn for Pieces mailing list from about 1912. And two things. One is that I feel like I've been listening to this conversation in one kind or another since at least 1965. So, this is not new. The two things that I think are strategically possible is with legislative stuff, you have to be very targeted, and it's possible to make a complete nuisance of yourself with only 2 or 3 people. You need a letterhead and somebody who will just crank it out as a cottage industry on every time you hear a pin drop, you send another nasty letter. There's also nothing that, legally at least, prohibits us from squatting on somebody else's address in a different zip code. I routinely call a representative in a very red district in Pennsylvania. All they really care about if you're in their zip code or not. They don't really care what your name is, which you might tell them very casually. And if need be, I have an address I can use, belongs to some old friends. But so I've made another little industry of that. But the more political thing is that there are a lot of connections to the military and everyone up to the Easter night. But I think we're missing one that's really obvious, and that's immigration. Half the military is trying to either build a wall, guard a wall, or in some cases prevent people like me from getting a driver's license. And half of Brooklyn, that actually happened the other day, half of Brooklyn is immigrant communities. And why are many of them here? Because they come from countries that are being torn apart by other things, contributions of our military. So that, to me, that's an obvious connection. And they don't all vote, that's true, but there are a lot of them. And there tends to be a lot of organizations of them, too.
And that's also been a good way for us to get some new people involved.
Exactly.
Because you may have seen we have these wonderful Refugees Are Welcome posters that we'd love for anybody to buy. But we've also had, just recently, I know I had a group of I think, was it high school students, Ed? Distributing our posters up and down here Atlantic Avenue. So if you go down the street, you will see some of our Refugees Are Welcome.
But even if you can get some
posters.
immigrant association of 3 people to co-sign some letter with you, you're in business.
Good point. And that does also connect with war and peace issues.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because where do you think a lot of those refugees are coming from? Countries we're bombing the crap out of, or we're paying for somebody to bomb the crap.
I have a suggestion from everything that everyone was saying is that we all have our agenda, the thing that is most important to us, right? But say, for instance, if we would try for the next 6 months to 8 months, instead of going to, because I went to this MTA thing across the street from me, and they were talking about the fare hike and what's going on, and the woman gave a great little presentation, and I brought up Brooklyn for Peace, and I brought up the military spending, and no one in the room actually thought about that connection. But I stepped away from something I always go to. So maybe in the next 6 months to 8 months, if we would just take a break from I know that what you believe in is very important, but maybe it's better if we can kind of step out and go to some other organizations and things are happening and listen to what their focus is, and then maybe bring in these issues that we're trying to connect to. Because there might be one person there that goes, oh, well, that's interesting. You know, it may not be where you're going to convert everyone, because it's hard to convert people who are very set on what they believe in and what they want to fight for. It's almost impossible to get them to move to the other side, because you don't really see the bigger picture. You see what's important to you, and I respect that. But I also think we have to really step out of the comfort zone in where we are always going and who we're always talking to, because we only go to meetings that are around what we're interested in. It's just like I'm a jazz musician, and if I only went to groups and gigs that dealt with Dixieland, I would never learn about bebop or progressive jazz or any of the other things. You have to step out and you have to play with different people in order to get better at what you're doing. And what we're doing is educating and communicating, dialoguing and educating through dialogue. And the only way we can do that is we have to be open to really stepping outside of our boxes and really listening to other people without keeping in the back of our mind what's most important to us. Because if we're open, we begin to find that what that person cares about and what you care about is the same thing, which is, you know, people want to be happy. They want to be able to eat. They want to be able to take care of their family. These are basic things. They want to be able to have a place to live, all of these things. So I am suggesting that as a thing to do, to try it and to see what comes out of you going to another event that isn't necessarily the choir that you like to go and sing with. And that's because I think we should have actions out of this meeting. We should have things that we do that doesn't necessarily have to be massive, you know, because anything that's massive starts very tiny. Starts small with little increments of things that we do, and then it grows into something bigger. So I'm putting on the table for us to, something simple is within the next 6 to 8 months, just go somewhere and participate in something that you are not particularly supporting. That's my suggestion of an action to do.
When they escalate the military budget, domestic issues, domestic programs suffer. They have to draw it from somewhere. And during Bush Sr.'s administration, they created this policy that America has to be the world police. Why do we have to be the world police? And it's basically the underlying issue is money. The businesses overseas, etc. I mean, we talked about in one of the meetings, we had a speaker here talking about Iran, and when Mohammed Mossadegh wanted to nationalize the oil industry, our CIA went in and got rid of him and put him in the Shah. And I think the problem is that if we wrap ourselves around one question, why do we have to be the police of the world? You know, that may be something that brings people around, because it affects a lot of domestic issues, domestic programs.
Well, to that, I would suggest that we pretend to be police to the world, but the areas we're policing kind of have something that we want, some resources. I think that's at the bottom of the issue. We say, well, they have coltan for our cell phones, or oil, or some other resource. So that's my take on it.
Well, I'm resonating to what Veronica is saying, and the point I was trying to make before is that we've been doing certain things over and over, and we haven't been growing, and we haven't really been, expanding the debate or increasing the concern in the general population about militarism and our country's role in this world. And so we have to examine what we're doing, think of other things to do, of other ways of approaching this issue. Some of them will work, some of them won't work, but I believe strongly that what our foreign policy is, our policy on the military and on military spending is so fundamental to so many other problems that we have that you don't have to genuflect in front of that. I'm not suggesting that people stop working on other issues, but that connection has to be made for people, or else we're all just going to be spinning around in circles and not really making fundamental change. And so the discussion has to be, what things can we do? What things can we try? Some will work, some won't. What things can we try that's different from what we've done before that will be more effective? And also challenging ourselves to say, well, how do we know if it's effective or not? What measurement are we using? And so to try that, Veronica's made a very concrete suggestion. That's one thing. We can make other concrete suggestions, but my fundamentally what I'm saying is we have to think really hard about doing things differently that are really going to make progressive movement more effective.
Okay.
I think a number of people said things that resonate for me, but we've talked about how to be strategic. We've talked about being pests, using our energy, even small numbers of us doing something that is an irritant. We've talked about indivisible and taking some of their issues or their strategies and using them, which means letter writing, sitting in the offices of elected officials, going to their meetings. And the other thing that others have talked about, and Ed had young kids going out and doing something. We don't know how to do that. We don't know how, and we haven't focused on getting people to do things. We don't ask our 4,000 people on our website and on our emails to do anything. We don't do that. And we haven't learned that you can't have an organization and engage people unless they have something to do that's meaningful. And the other thing that people said, and it's related, is that we have to know what young people care about. And so we can talk about peace. And by the way, I have, forgive me, but we could have peace and still have a totalitarian society. So the word peace somehow, I would like to see a focus on the end of war and the end of militarism. But what do young people care about? They care about their escalating school debt. They care about the future of their health care, the future of their lives and the environment. So they're totally moved by the environment and the need to get rid of fossil fuels. And they're growingly concerned about the issue of fascism versus democratic constitutionalism. So we should be identifying what the issues are that people care about, young people care about, and then relating it to what we do. And we have to learn how to give people things to do.
Any young people in the house?
Yes.
And Indivisible talks about that. They talk about it, and they were successful all around the country. A lot of what has happened in terms of the change has come about through people taking on the tactics of Indivisible, almost like Sharp did in the Far East, in the Middle East. They used his designs and his tactics to bring about the spring, the Middle Eastern Spring. So we have to find ways to use those tactics that you were talking about from Indivisible and to get people to do things that are irritating, and to change the way we look at things and find new ways of focusing and going to where young people are. If we want to get involved with young people, and we don't want to die out of old age, then we really have to find young people. And the way to do that is to go to where the young people are and what they're concerned with.
Now I'm going to recognize myself. I mean, I talk to young people all day long. I'm a professor and I teach American foreign policy. The what? Thank you. You know, so I don't feel, I mean, right, Emily, you know that. I mean, I do it all day long. So I get paid to do that in all different kind of forms. And so now I have to say I don't, you know, and in my teaching I actually meet a lot of different kinds of people. So I don't feel like that you know, that it's just that I know the same old people. I think that there's genuine question about, you know, it's not just like meeting them or I talk, you know, I listen to them all day long. It's what resonates with people, and you know, and that's what is partly an issue right now, is that it's not, you know, that issues of war and peace right now are not resonating with young people, and that's not because of any, you know, mental deficit. It's, you know, it's because of a variety of other things that are, you know, which is what you're saying, Ken, about other things, you know, that are assuming primacy. So I think that that's a real, you know, I don't think we have to like beat ourselves up like we haven't, and the truth is there's lots of things for people to do and there's lots of stuff for young people to do, but I see that your hand is up, so go right ahead.
Well, on a national level, what's moving young people is gun violence, because they're being mowed down all over the place. So that could be connected to militarism, of course, and the people who make the weapons, etc. But that is an issue moving young people, that's one. And I also think mass incarceration and Black Lives Matter are young people's issues.
Yeah, well, I think along those lines, one of the things that I was very impressed by the students who worked on gun control issues was they didn't define the issue narrowly. They didn't go out and just say, you know, we're a bunch of middle-class white kids and we're worried about getting shot in our schools. They went to Chicago and they lined up kids from the inner cities to speak at their events and talk about how it affected them. They built a broader coalition. They were very good at that. They were much better at that than we've been in recent years. And I think that's a crucial question for us. How can we go out and do that? How can we build those kinds of alliances? We've certainly tried to do it in the past. A couple of years ago at our Pathmakers to Peace event, we gave some folks from Black Lives Matter one of our major awards, for instance.
I mean, I'm not an organizer, but I think they're taking the leadership. So we have to follow along the leadership when they're having an event, when they're having a meeting, when they're having a demonstration. We go and we make our connections. And we participate, say we would like to connect this up with militarism. And I bet they would welcome us with open arms. It's hard to find, but I mean, we did have the movement by Ms. Emma Gonzalez of the Parkland students, and but I guess, you know, I don't know where they are now, but and you have young people in the community like JFREJ, Jews for Social and Economic Justice. They're young people, and they include Jews of color, so they're multiracial, that I know. There are other groups I don't know about, lots of them. I know very little. So, I mean, we just have to keep our eyes and our Facebook pages open and like any of those organizations that come up, and then go to their events.
And follow-up is that's one of the keys, because we did reach out to a lot of different things, especially after Pathmakers, but you have a limited amount of hands, you know, like boots on the ground, people that are there to help follow up, that then it falls through the cracks. And so I think, you know, there are so many different little organizations that we could connect to and work with, but if we don't have a consistency and follow-up, then we just like a fad. we just come and go and that's it, and they don't, and it's hard to do when you don't have, you look in this room, we should have filled to capacity with all different sides, you know, different ages, everything, if we actually, yeah, and I personally believe that it's a relationship that we build. When you guys all started your peace movement, you were young. You were in college, you were like, I'm not saying you're all old now, because I'm old too. But I mean, your initial excitement came from the connection of the war, and you were young. And so, but you have continued with this because it became a passion. And so how do we ignite, and we don't have to have thousands of kids, but if we had a handful of kids that are like where we are now, to ignite a passion that will take them into the future, because this is ongoing. This war and all this stuff is ongoing. It's not like it's going to stop in, you know, 3 months or 4 months or a year from now. So that, I think, is really the hardest part, is how do we follow up? How do we identify people that we can mentor? Because it's a mentorship too. It's not just, oh, you know, I want you to da-da-da-da, and we're going to do this, and next thing you know, you don't care what's happening with this person and what's going on in their life.
Emily?
Yeah, Emily, they put you on the spot.
I think that Peace Action New York State has done a really good job of like engaging young people. That's how I got into peace work, was starting a chapter of Peace Action at Hofstra. And I don't think there are any college chapters of Peace Action in Brooklyn. Peace Action specifically, I don't know if there are other like peace groups at Brooklyn colleges, but I think that would be something that we could try to identify and like invite them to our events and try to do programming with them. I think something that made Peace Action New York State's outreach to youth really effective was that it was also young people like doing that. Like I was approached at first by Kate Alexander, who was only like 4 years older than me. And so that was cool. Like we really like were able to relate on like a lot of things, you know, not only being passionate about the same things. And I also think Peace Action New York State did a really good job of offering like a lot of support and like resources and time. Like Kate Alexander put like, I think like at least 20 hours a week of her work week into the student chapters. And now there are 20 and they're all doing really well. And so I think it is really goes back to what Veronica was saying about like, do we have the resources to put that time and effort in to make it really successful? So yeah.
Thank you.
What, we're doing the rest? No, I'm seeing hands, yes, go ahead.
So that's an example of what I was trying to get at earlier, which maybe I didn't express so clearly. But Peace Action made a determination that they wanted to organize on campuses, and they put resources into it. And they stuck with that, and they put those resources into it. And that Brooklyn for Peace and other groups, you come up with a strategy for something and devote your resources to it. It might be on, you can say whatever it is, whether it's engaging with Black Lives Matter, and mass incarceration, gun violence, the environmental concerns, but you identify something. I feel at least, as I said before, the whipsaw of it, it's one thing for another, and there's very good reasons why that happens to us, but it really, I think, weakens us when we go from one, the follow-up, as Veronica said, the follow-up is weak. And so we need to think, you know, seriously about, and all of us. So Ed, I work in the office a lot with Emily, and we had these high school students calling up, and they wanted community service hours. And we had some things for them to do, like make campaign buttons and so forth. But I said, what could be more meaningful? And I'm not the best person in the world to work with high school students, but I thought, well, Ed was a high school teacher for years, this postering campaign sounds like something that kids of that age might do. And Ed grabbed it and ran on with it. And it's a good thing, but I don't have anybody else, I would say, if other things like that come up, to say, gee, can you take this on? Can you relate to these people, or whatever the campaign or just the relationship building is? Can you help with this? And that's what we have to. I think we should think about what our structure is. We should think about what our commitments are. Is what are we really going to do that we follow up with, that we stay with, that it's not a one-time thing, that we really are gonna, keep on doing this and building it. And how can we build it?
Yes, and you said that you also wanted to ask about people in South Brooklyn who might be here. That would be.
There's no one here.
Well, we could find that out in 1 second. Is there anybody?
Anybody here from Central Brooklyn?
Yeah.
I just want to go back to the point of resources and moving forward. And I've been in Repro Rights for about 30 odd years now, and been a Planned Parenthood supporter for all of years. But one of the interesting things, and what we've sometimes done in the past in our groups, is Planned Parenthood every week sends you something to do. It's click this button to send a message to your Congress creature. There's always a donation button too, that's true. But it's, click to send this particular, the message is about the grievance of the week, basically, and it'll give you, directions to call your Congress creature if you're even more ambitious. So just getting you invested by doing even some symbolic small thing in the same area tends to kind of, it sort of involves people, it makes them feel more like parts.
Mitch, did you want to say anything?
Yeah.
I think you should.
Yeah. Now trying to think of what it is that Brooklyn for Peace can offer. What is it that we have to offer? Well, we would like to see the issue of war and militarism being made part of ongoing campaigns, many different campaigns, right, that are going on. So how do we and we also want to get some of the other movements to find that it's okay to bring in other issues, because right now in the stranglehold of the Democratic Party, in my view, they haven't been allowed to bring in other issues to link up. So when you had the march in Washington against gun violence, which I was at, Robin was at, and we wanted to intersect with people without being preachy and without telling people what to do. So we just gave out sort of ambiguous flyer stickers that had a series of Venn diagrams with all these different issues on it, without our name on it, without a name of a group, and many colors, and people loved it. I was shocked that all these people took it, said, oh, right, this is an issue, right, this is connected, and we wanted people to try to figure out for themselves how these issues were connected. And we gave out thousands of them, and to my surprise, because I'm a dinosaur also, people took pictures, not only took them to give out, but they took pictures on their phone of these stickers, and they mailed them immediately, or whatever they did. They texted them immediately to thousands of people. And so these stickers went out all over, and people actually were talking about among themselves without us having to lecture about how to do this. So how do we actually do that? I mean, do we set up some sort of workshops that can talk with people about how to do these type of things specific? I know the Yes Men are doing that tomorrow night, the group in Manhattan, on some of these tactics and strategies for that. But it's just that we have to preaching to myself. Mitchell, you have to break. You have to shut up.
Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna wrap up, but before I shut up, I wanna say a couple things. You know, I think, first speaking for myself, I'm actually finding this meeting valuable because it's making me think about, I'm listening to what different people are saying, and it's just, you know, this is a moment when we need to think as much as anything else. So I just, you know, as the chair, with Bruce, I just think even having a conversation is worth it. I also think, though, that this is too negative. You know, first of all, we do lots of things, and we have ongoing things. And anybody just has to look at Matt. He has a million things for people to do, and they're more or less connected. And we've been effective at a lot of moments. So I don't think that we gain anything by just acting as though, you know, we've just been this failed group forever. We have at times of war. Obviously, that's when people flood in, and we think. I mean, we're not just always the same. And as I said, I think we've actually had a terrifically good impact on the Brooklyn delegation, for example. That's real. Even, you know, in terms of to some degree, and I don't want to like claim amazing credit for Brooklyn for Peace, but Kirsten Gillibrand also has been very affected by the peace organizing that has gone on, you know, throughout New York State. And again, we go up and we go down, but we do lots of things, and we've collaborated in great ways. And I think it's important to really, you know, recognize that. I also think that, you know, we need to keep in mind as well, this is a rough moment for peace movements. Right? It's not like Brooklyn for Peace is having some uniquely amazing thing, right? At the national level, the national peace movement is not strong right now. And again, we can all think of the reasons why that's true. So, you know, we can be confident that because of the militarism of the United States, our time will come again very soon. The question is, how can we be proactive? I'm just listening to some of the comments. First, I'm hoping that some people will just write in your thoughts from this meeting. But you know, one idea that, just listening to everybody, is it does raise a question of whether there is some kind of across Brooklyn thing where people could collaborate. In other words, from groups that are working on different things, is there a kind of Brooklyn manifesto that we could build to, which would involve input from people who are working in Brooklyn on climate change and guns and whatever, you know, say some actual thing. So it's not just like we go to their meeting and say, by the way, people, have you thought about militarism today? Right? You know, some concrete thing that we would do together which would sort of express a progressive desire across the borough. I mean, I'm not sure what that is. But, you know, I mean, everybody here is reflecting the fact that there's a need to link issues. And there's, you know, and it's not just that verbal thing. How many million times have we all said the military budget, you know, is hurting all these other things? We've made those points, you know, a lot. But how to make that real, how to make that feel important, and maybe some kind of Brooklyn structure. I'm not saying that Brooklyn for Peace organized, but some cross-Brooklyn thing that could be on campuses or whatever would be a direction. I'm just giving my quick impressions as I'm listening to everybody. Mostly, I do feel like I just need to hear my friends, all of you, you know, hear what you have to say, and really encourage everybody to write a little something, and you know, and share that, because this isn't a simple moment. It's a really difficult political moment. We have to really understand that and not just be mad at ourselves because we can't solve it right away. And I want to thank everybody for coming. Those who want to be more active should see Matt or Ed, right? You know, because there is ongoing stuff to do.
I hate for us to end on sort of not having something to do. We've talked about we have to ask people to do something. And Rusty, you're just saying let's think about this. No, we have to have something to do. And that's so your ending is a sort of denouement.
Make a poster and while we hang them up flyer and put them up.
Well, I think people may also want to work with the PJ committee who are coming here to make those people.
Yeah, well, one thing I would suggest to people as a starter is we have a lot of committees that are semi-active or not so active. Take a look on the Brooklyn for Peace website, and if you're not on a committee, either sign up for an active one or look at one of the inactive ones and get a couple of people together and set up something. PEJ, Peace and Economic Justice.
PEJ is the only active one.
All right, so there you have it. That's your answer.
PEJ is it.
Okay, so go to it.
And fundraising. Fundraising is the other.
Yeah, but the website has a list of the committees.
We're not doing it.
Start one up. Get a couple of friends together.
Are we going to take the idea and start perhaps going into the college? Brooklyn is the largest university town probably in the country. With all the universities and colleges and law schools, we probably have a larger student body than anywhere in the country.
Yes, why can't it be posted with every student government, our Brooklyn for Peace meetings and our actions? And maybe we could start a student chapter doing that way. Rusty's a professor,
We had an event at St. Joseph's. We had an event at St. Joseph's College, and some of the students were very good and very active in the event.
And I think they joined Peace Action.
Yeah, and then they never came to any of our events.
I think they formed a group for Peace Action. Yeah. Yeah, but we didn't.
Not for us.
We're not giving them things to do.